you've been following my posts on social media and even listening to my podcast, you know that Peru has been undergoing quite another little crisis in the last few days. On Thursday night, Congress decided they would finally do something about the president, who was unbelievably unpopular. In fact, her polling ratings have been at anywhere between 2 and 4% popularity or approval ratings, and things have not been good. There have been calls for her resignation for years, since she came into power back in December 2022, I believe. So anyway, Congress has done a pretty good job of keeping her in power and resisting any efforts to remove her. But I think with elections coming up, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, with elections coming up in 6 months, they finally decided that they're going to distance themselves from her. So on Thursday night, about 11:30, they finally took a vote and unanimously voted to impeach President Dino Boluarte. Boluarte herself had come under... Boluarte had taken over when the previous president, who was elected in 2021, was removed from office because he tried to, well, basically what it was, he tried to instigate a coup, probably the worst and shortest-lived coup, definitely in Peruvian history, but maybe in world history. He had zero support, and literally within minutes of trying to dissolve Congress, the military and the police, who, when it comes down to it, probably has the final say over who runs the country, they all said, sorry, but you're not getting our support, you're on your own. So he tried to flee to the Mexican embassy and was caught by the police and put in prison, where he's been ever since. So anyway, his vice president at the time, who was elected with him in 2021, because elections are every 5 years in Peru. She was the vice president, and she automatically moved up to be the president. But 11:30 on Thursday night, the Peruvian Congress decided, I think, that they've had enough. And as I said, they wanted to distance themselves to make it look like they weren't supporting her, which they had been for several years now. But with elections coming up, as I said, they needed to do something to save face. And of course, everyone knows it across the country. But the way the Peruvian Constitution works is the president of Congress moves up when there is no vice president. And apparently they, and I didn't know this until recently, but you learn these things over the years since it's happened so much. But the president of Congress, when there is no vice president, and vice presidents are not automatically selected except every 5 years when there's an election, the president of Congress is sworn in as president. It's happened several times in the last few years. In fact, Peruvians they've kind of accepted it, because this is the 7th president in the last 9 years. The 6th president since I moved here to live permanently in 2018. That's kind of sad, but we've gone through an awful lot of presidents, and there have only been one election since I've lived here. There was an election in 2016, another one in 2021, and then there's another scheduled for April 26th of next year. It's really kind of a bad situation, but right now the new president is a man called Jose Heri. Heri has very little experience in government. He kind of took over the presidency of Congress because no one else wanted it. Congress has about the same approval rating as the president did. Government, at least on the national level, and honestly probably at just about every level, but especially at the national level, has no approval from the population whatsoever. Corruption and lack of doing anything and incompetence means that people just have zero trust in their national government. So in the early morning hours of Friday, And this, by the way, is I'm recording this on Tuesday around 1 o'clock, a little bit after, in the afternoon, by the way. Heri became president of Peru. Since then, things have been, to say the least, very, I don't know how you would put it. Things have been in a flux like none of us have seen in a long, long time. The biggest reason for that is because under, if I remember this right, Article 120 of the Peruvian Constitution, the Peruvian president cannot do anything without the approval of his cabinet and prime minister. He must have a majority approval. There are 18 cabinet members and the prime minister, and so far he has appointed no one, even though he's on his 5th day as president of Peru. Now that is extremely unusual because we've had so much experience with newly appointed presidents in the past few years that they usually appoint their cabinet within hours, if not a day or two at the most. And that's been a problem because there have been some appointments that have been just unbelievably bad. Criminals, in fact, they've done zero vetting for some. Some of the presidents have done, so we've gotten some unbelievably terrible prime ministers and ministers, and they change constantly. So this might be a good deal. President Heri might be spending a little time actually vetting his proposed candidates. Or actually, they're not proposed candidates. He simply appoints them and then they're sworn in immediately. I think the only one that requires congressional approval is the prime minister, who has to go in front of Congress and state what their policies are going to be within 30 days, or another prime minister has to be appointed, or he has to be reappointed. But he has to go, or I should say she, but it's always been men, has to go before Congress and explain what the new policies will be. Peru's kind of holding its breath right now because with elections coming up in 6 months, this particular president will be basically an interim caretaker president because there will almost certainly be a runoff election in May of 2026, and then the new president is sworn in on July 28th, which is Independence Day of next year. So we're all keeping our fingers crossed that he comes in and does a good job, but there's an awful lot of, shall we say, lack of trust of President Heri. He's under investigation for several of his own accusations, the largest probably being he was, and I don't want to say this wrong, but he was accused back in December of 2024 of either sexual assault or rape. I know different media sources are saying different things on that, but definitely at least a sexual assault of a woman at a Christmas party, I believe it was, in December of last year. Now the charges were eventually dropped against him for a lack of evidence is what the prosecutor said. But in that time when an investigation was going on, he was given several orders to do by the judge, and he is accused of basically ignoring what he was supposed to do. The other person involved in the incident that was also accused left for France back in, well, it was last fall, which fall in Peru is March and April. And that person left for France without notifying the prosecutors or the judge, and there's a lot of questions because they also didn't provide any biological evidence to prove his innocence. So a lot of people say he just plain fled to France to hide prosecution. So anyway, that at the very least is going over very poorly with Peru, especially Peruvian women who have already held several protests in large cities because at the least it looks bad to have a person who has been accused of rape being the president of the country. Peru has a big issue, a huge problem with the macho culture here, and many of the women, just rightfully so, are quite upset at this because abuse of women, even the killing of women, what's the word, feminicide, has been a major problem in the country over the past few years, over probably since its inception, but it's become more noticeable because it's getting more media coverage, and it is a monstrous problem in Peru how women are treated. So anyway, I just checked a little while ago, and there still has not been any appointments. The president said that they will be they will be made in the coming hours, but he also said something to that effect yesterday evening and Sunday evening. He's changed some of his promises on who he's going to appoint. At first he said he would be taking some ministers from the previous cabinet of Boluarte, but now he's saying that it will be a completely new cabinet. At least there will be none coming from the previous administration, and he will not be making any appointments of ministers who are currently serving at least in Congress. Both of those two, as I said before, have unbelievably bad approval ratings in the country. So I think if he goes outside, that's definitely going to be a good thing. And if he's vetting his cabinet officials and actually looking into their qualifications as he says he is, that also is going to be a good thing, because this is a very critical time. Peru has gone through an awful lot since COVID, at the very least, back in March 2020. But we're all wondering what's going to happen in the next few hours. Hopefully he'll make appointments in the next few hours. I know it's now been, I believe 2 days ago, it could have been yesterday morning, that the chairman of Peru's Central Reserve Bank said that this is going to be extremely crucial. Obviously, a lot of the world's economy is based on the values of the US dollar. That the value of the dollar has dropped worldwide an average of 8.4% since, in the last 6 months, since the election of President Trump. I'm sorry, 8.5%. Peru has fared slightly better, and because the value of the dollar has dropped 8.4%, just a tiny bit better. But there's an awful lot of concern over what's going to happen with Peruvian policies coming up in the next 6 months to, 9 months, until there's a new president appointed or sworn in. The chairman of the Reserve Bank of Peru said, and he made a special point of said, we don't make predictions, but he said it's going to be quite interesting to see. And a lot of other analysts have said that they fully expect that the value of the dollar to continue to drop a little bit. And those are Peruvian analysts, by the way. They don't see any strengthening of the Peruvian economy enough to make much of a difference, especially over this short period, especially over the constant political crisis that we're going through. And things almost certainly won't get any better with elections coming up in the next few weeks. I don't know if you saw the woman walk by. She's been around here for quite a bit in the last few hour or so, and she's given me a little bit of I don't know, she seems friendly, but she also seems to not be all there mentally. So we're going to let things go. I think she actually left a flower on the bench where I was sitting earlier. So anyway, we're all wondering what's going to happen. That's the situation in Peru right now as of Tuesday at about 1:30. Actually, it was about 1 o'clock was the last time I checked the news to see if anything had changed. So if you like this kind of video, I'll try to do more of these, because I know people sometimes don't like to read, sometimes don't like to listen to the podcast, and things like this are a little easier. They like to just watch things on YouTube. I know I've been unable to find almost anything about what's been going on in Peru on any kind of social media, especially any kind of information that's accurate and in English. I saw a few videos, and I'm not going to say which agency it was, but it looked like they almost used AI or just did a quick Google search to come up with something to make a fast video. And the information they used had nothing to do with, or definitely didn't come from anyone who lives here and has an idea of what's going on. So I'll be glad to do more of these if you like it. In fact, I probably will, even if you don't like it, because I know there will be some that want to watch videos like this. But If you find this interesting and informative and useful to you, I appreciate a subscription. Feel free to subscribe to the channel because I'm definitely going to do more stuff like this. I think people need to know what's going on from someone who actually knows what's going on besides the Spanish-speaking community. And I do a lot of vetting. In fact, I do all my vetting from the Peruvian news media. I've been watching the media here for years, so I have a pretty good idea of who's going to be accurate and who's not, and who's going to provide real journalism. And I'm sure also, before I go, I know a lot of people are going to be wondering what this is going to have to do with perhaps their plans if they're coming to Peru, or even people that might live here now. The truth is, right now, Peru is extremely calm. This goes on so much that people aren't too concerned about what's happening right now. They are waiting, but they're not very concerned. There's a massive protest planned in Lima tomorrow. I'm actually in Lima. I live in Cusco, but I flew into Lima yesterday afternoon. I'm debating whether to go see what's happening during the protest because sometimes they get, well, quite often they get violent. And that is not something I want to be a part of, even if I'm on the edge or the periphery of a protest. But I have been to Peruvian protests before. I've actually been hit by projectiles one time during protests almost 3 years ago now. So it depends. Protests in Lima tend to continue on into the night, and that's when things get really rough. But this is a protest that's heavily supported and probably will have an awful lot of Peru's young people, university-age students. And they are saying that it will be peaceful and yet very, very massive. So we'll just have to see tomorrow. I'm going to be here at least through then. I don't know what's going to be happening in other cities, but there is talk of protests happening in places like Arequipa and Cusco and Chiclayo, Trujillo to the north. We just really don't know. People don't like to make a lot of, they don't like to let things get out about what's going to happen because they don't want to have issues with the police. They try to keep things from being known by the police until the last minute, because that's another part of the government. Peru has a national police service, and that's another part of the national government that's not particularly trusted by an awful lot of people. So I'll be doing a lot more reporting on this. Keep your fingers crossed that it doesn't affect much. Hopefully it'll just be a lot of traffic issues with streets being blocked, but you just never know here. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, which may come out very, very soon, depending on what happens.